Hi, everyone, and welcome to the final instalment of the Foundation Year's Recruitment and Retention Vodcast series. I'm your host, Seb Thorpe, and today, once again, we'll think about and discuss ways in which we can attract and also retain talented staff within the early years sector. And for today's session, I'm very pleased to welcome James Hempsall, Managing Director at Coram Hempsall. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Really appreciate you giving up the time. So to begin with, James, could you talk us through some ways in which recruitment strategies have been effective, maybe some that you've seen that are really, really powerful when aiming to attract really talented staff into the sector?
Yeah, I will. I think probably it's important for me to say a couple of things before I start talking about solutions and ideas. I'd really just first of all like to acknowledge that before we get into the detail, that challenges and frustrations do exist across the whole sector in recruitment and retention. And no single action will solve the difficulties that people are experiencing. Indeed, I would avoid anybody who would suggest that there are simple answers to this very complex issue. But there are lots of solutions. And I've been doing some specific work over the past 3 years on helping practitioners and leaders and managers to rethink recruitment and retention. Indeed, that's been the title of the package of support that we've been delivering. And when I prepared that package 3 years ago, I went back into our archives and looked at the work that we had done on recruitment and retention over the past 25 years. It's our 25th birthday this year. That reflection did remind me that this is a multi-channel approach. There's lots of things that we need to do to support recruitment and retention. But I did write a guide, and the first guide I wrote is here. It's called Finders Keepers, and I wrote it in 2001. And it was a guide to recruiting and retaining staff in early years and childcare. What struck me was that many of the challenges that we talk about now were acknowledged in that piece of writing over 20 years ago. Finding, recruiting, keeping, motivating, skills shortages, quality of staff, all of the things that people talk about now. So there was definitely some things that haven't changed. And I wondered what was different now, given that it seems to me that more and more people are talking about recruitment and retention as being a challenge. So we've been reflecting on those differences, and one of the key things was, and your question is about recruitment, is that actually the technology and the methods that we can find and communicate with potential candidates is totally transformed. So the way in which we can take ownership of our own communications out there, that our social media and our websites, our use of video to demonstrate who we are as settings is transformative. So that was the big key difference I think I've seen in the past 20 years. But what's really important is that we hold on to the idea that recruitment is a mix of very similar and the same processes that we've always done in recruitment, but they should be sustained actions. And by that, I mean that they should be regular and continuous. And I've worked with quite a few settings who undertake recruitment style activities even when they don't need staff yet. And I think that's important, because it's about how we communicate with the world to attract people to us. Given the competition and given the difficulties, we need to become magnetic organisations that people gravitate to. So the same methods, sustained methods, but also some new ones as well, using those multi-channel and modern ways. So when we wrote the Rethinking Recruitment and Retention package, we looked at 10 different actions that we thought would help exactly that, for us to rethink recruitment and retention in the modern context, because there are definitely things there that are useful for rethinking. The first thing is to think twice about what you're reading or what you're being told about recruitment and retention difficulties in the sector. They are there, but they can sometimes make us feel that we're on it's an impossible task that we just won't be able to recruit. And if you start to think that, that permeates through your messaging and your communication and your approaches. So that's really important for us to think about, because when I deliver these sessions, I can be in the same room with two settings sat on the same table. One of them will say, I've got a waiting list for people that want to work in our setting, sat next to somebody in the same community who says they're struggling to find staff. So there's obviously some things I was really curious about. There's obviously some things that one of the settings is doing differently to the other. And it's not always about pay or terms and conditions. It's about how people feel, what they're attracted to, what they see the opportunities are, and what that job can do for them in their career. One of the other 10 steps was about the importance of focusing on what we can do in our recruitment, not that we can't. So we build our plans around what we can do, which is really a strength-based approach. But I think the other thing attitudinally is that we need to make sure that we think about what we need to recruit, and perhaps which is different to what we want to recruit. So in the past, we might have been able to find, well, I call them the Mary Poppins candidates, practically perfect in every way. Will work full time, are experienced, will be a natural fit in the team, and that perfect jigsaw piece that fits into the puzzle. Well, actually, sometimes we've got to look at candidates differently and think, well, actually, we can build a team of part-time workers. We can bring them up to speed, and we can support them to fit into the team rather than expecting that to happen on day one.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Really wonderful to hear. And to develop on some of those points, you mentioned the word magnetic. We must become magnetic. How is that magnetism developed when in role? So how can the setting really work to retain that talented group of staff?
To retain staff, you have to be listening all of the time. You have to be talking, and you have to be open to flexibility that meets the needs of that staff team member, but also meets the needs of the business. I've certainly in 25 years sometimes I feel perhaps been more flexible on the staff side and it's compromised the business. And sometimes I've been too rigid on the business side, and it's meant that staff that hasn't been a great fit. Having said that, I've got staff team colleagues here who have been here for over 20 years, lots of them actually, as well as bringing in new people into the team all of the time, including apprentices. I think it's important to acknowledge that people don't stay forever. And I've noticed that in research with childminders, for example. If a childminder will often be a childminder to fit in with their family circumstances, to work from home, and they might have young children themselves. And after 5 years, their circumstances change, and they often leave childminding. They might go into other aspects of the early years and childcare sector, or they might go and do something else. If they work for more than 5 years, they're more likely to work as a childminder for 20. And so that's really quite interesting. So we have to think about, well, what are the peaks and the troughs in terms of people's childcare careers? The other interesting thing for me was that when you look at the demographic data of the workforce, the average age of an early years and childcare worker is actually around 50. And the average age when people leave the early years and childcare sector is 50. So you've got a perfect storm there. So if the average age of our workforce is 50 and the average age of people leaving is 50, then that might go some way to explaining why people are leaving in the numbers that they are leaving. So your danger point is 50. So what do you do as a manager in the run up to 50 to talk to those members of staff and say, okay, so what are your long-term plans? Are there adjustments that we can make to your work? Are you seeking a role pivot? Is there something else in this organisation that you would rather do? Would you like to reduce your hours? I've got plenty of people in that position in my business here who have gone from 5 days to 4, and some of them are talking about going from 4 days to 3. I don't want to lose them. I don't want to be that manager that says stay for 5 days or nothing. I want them in. It also allows me time and resource to bring in new people, including apprentices and younger workforce, to balance out the age profile of the business. So, and I think when you think about practice, it's hard work working with children in early years and childcare on a full-time basis. I know I've done it, but I know that personally speaking, at my age, I would find it a struggle to do that now full time, not like I did when I was in my early 20s when I was a practitioner. So that's a really important factor to consider when we're thinking about how people grow up in your business. But there are lots of other issues that help too. People stay if they feel they've got some level of independence in their role. They stay if there's flexibility, and sometimes when we are a sector under pressure, then flexibility can be one of the things that becomes more difficult for managers. But the greater flexibility obviously has better benefits. The work environment, so what does it feel like in the space that you're working in? Those keep people there. Trust in leadership keeps people in their jobs as well. So openness, positive culture, honesty, feeling looked after by management, fairness, a sense that everybody across the team is being treated fairly, access to development opportunities or not. There are members of the teams who want development opportunities, they want to career progress, they want to go on training, but there are others who don't, and I think that needs to be an option and to balance that out. But I think there's a whole thing about feeling a sense of enjoyment and achievement and being part of something special, which of course this sector is. And that's what's really important, that each setting fosters that creates that sense of being part of something special. We shouldn't expect anybody else, government or the media or anybody else, to do that. That's something that we absolutely have control of.
Absolutely. And we know that diverse and inclusive environments really add value to the early years experience for both the children and the staff teams themselves. And we've already touched upon the age demographic. And are there any other ways in which settings could really enhance the recruitment process to promote diversity and inclusion within their teams? Obviously, the age, as I say, is one of the demographics we've touched upon. Any others?
Well, I think I'd forgive you for thinking that I was talking in quite broad terms in the past two questions. When you're talking about something like this, it reminds us that recruitment and retention is absolutely structured on systems and processes. So that's really important, that the systems and processes that you use for recruitment and retention are inclusive and do provide diversity in teams and your approaches. So things like your job descriptions absolutely must be developed to be inclusive. They should be inclusive language. They should avoid gender or bias or stereotypes. They should highlight your commitment as an organisation to diversity inclusion. It should show how you already achieve diversity and inclusion. If you've clicked through a social media post and onto a website, you should be seeing that people from diverse backgrounds are using your service and delivering it. The blog or the video piece might show that as well. You should clearly state that you encourage applications from diverse backgrounds. It's unqualified, qualified, various routes, transferring from different parts of the sector or allied parts of the sector, for example. And when I talked about multi-channels before, there's stuff there around broadening your recruitment channels. So where are you posting your social media? Who are you tagging in? Who do you know who would put that onto their Facebook feed? So local organisations, diverse job boards or community platforms. Can you ask partner organisations or that represent underrepresented groups, for example, to post that information or to share it? Where can you attend to spread the word? And that's part, of course, that should be integrated in your marketing and community outreach anyway, so that you are reaching all aspects of the community, so you can show that you are diverse and inclusive. But then there's serious HR systems like anonymized recruitment processes, removing identifying information from applications so that those who are shortlisting aren't being influenced by an unconscious bias, and those details become revealed later. So instead, at that point, you are focusing on skills and qualifications and experience during that initial screening process. But also, I think I'm a great fan of supporting people to do the best interview they can. And I think sometimes we get into that mindset where interviews are combative and testing, like an exam. And actually, I prefer it if people have had an opportunity to come and see you, to come and ask questions, to find out about the setting or organisation. That, for me, shows a level of interest too. So those sorts of opportunities are important. I also like telling people what the interview is going to be like. So who's going to be interviewing them? How long is it going to be? What's the format? Asking them to prepare something for an interview. All of these things help people with different learning styles, different working styles, neurodiverse people to be prepared and enabled to perform at their best in that highly stressful and artificial interview environment.
Absolutely agree. And again, something touched upon very briefly previously, apprenticeships. Apprentices have been an integral component of early years for quite some time now, settings up and down the country. How could settings leverage apprenticeships and apprentices to really support that recruitment and also later on the retention within that particular setting?
Yeah, and a setting who really wants a senior member of staff full time to fill their vacancy will struggle with the idea of growing an apprentice over time to build into a role like that. But it's important that we spin all of those plates at the same time, so we focus on what our urgent needs are, but actually how we grow talent in our businesses for the short, medium, and long terms. And we've had apprentices in our business here quite regularly. We have one who's just finished being an apprentice, and we have somebody else who joined as an apprentice and has been with us 8 years. And I've talked about the age profile of my business. It's been fantastic to bring in new, young, much younger people into the business because they bring the different skill portfolio and they're building roles that complement the skills and experience that our established team have. So again, to attract new talent, we've got to be promoting the fact that we do actively welcome and are positive about apprenticeships. Sometimes an apprentice might knock on the door, or you might get an inquiry rather than you going out into the world. So promoting apprenticeships externally and internally is key as well. Everybody in the business needs to know why apprenticeships are a good idea, the benefits, on both sides. I've watched with fascination how our team have worked with apprentices and learned from them, but also being able to let go of tasks themselves to enable them to focus on the things that they want to do in changing and developing their careers. And we need to be thinking about targeting diverse candidates too. Apprenticeships have been a really good way in which we've brought diversity into our staff team here. Of course, you need to navigate and look at the opportunities that there are for government funding and subsidies and support for that. And local council early years teams are good sources of information for finding out what funding is there to help. But for a successful apprenticeship, I've talked about how the staff team have learned and developed from that, but you've got to prepare your existing team for apprenticeships to enter the workforce, like you would volunteers. People need to know how to work with apprentices, how to support their professional development, how to supervise them, how to help them with some of the things that we might consider to be basic barriers to joining work. So sometimes it's a case of supporting routes to work, transport to work, or some of those basic work skills that we might take for granted as older workforce, but actually to put yourselves in the position of an apprentice to see how you can support them on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there's lots of training providers as well who are there to provide training for them out of the office on day release, for example, which helps focus their learning as well. So that's an important consideration, I think. I also think not only in terms of line management, mentor and coach relationships or buddying relationships within teams are really important. Pair apprenticeships with experienced staff members who can provide guidance and support and feedback and provide an extra layer of observation to feed in with the apprentice and perhaps their line manager. So those regular check-ins help in open and honest communication, identify perhaps things that aren't just quite right, that actually can easily be solved without the apprentice thinking that they need to leave or stop or they're not doing very well. Sometimes it's about curious questioning of an apprentice will get to the bottom of what's going on with them. They might not openly or easily share information with you. And that's all part of a positive work environment, isn't it? So flat hierarchies and people being able to talk about what they know, feel, and think.
Absolutely. And then finally, in terms of specialisms, how can settings be encouraged, or have you seen anything that's been really fantastic practice in terms of settings encouraging and supporting their staff teams to develop specialisms to really add value to that wider team and that setting as a whole?
Well, I mean, first, I absolutely agree that there are opportunities for people in early years and childcare roles and entry roles to be able to develop specialisms. I mean, that's exactly what I did. I worked as a practitioner, and it was the professional development and training that really sparked my interest, and that's the direction I went from my strong foundation as being a practitioner. And those specialisms in SEND or speech and language can really enhance the offer for children, parents and carers and the rest of the workforce in a setting. But I would stress the point that both SEND and speech and language are tasks within all of our roles in the sector and shouldn't always be looked at as a specialism. We all have roles in those areas and responsibility and the opportunity and ability to reach children, families, and colleagues in that area. But that said, there are ways in which professional development opportunities can be offered. So we've got, that you can offer specialised training. There's lots of different training out there, digitally, online, and in person. But we just before COVID lockdown, we were running a programme called Talk Derby for a brief period to get that started, and we were training lots of practitioners in speech and language approaches, and everybody came to the same conclusion that actually lots of easily achievable actions have the greatest impact. So projects like that and opportunity area projects. The EYPDP has been a good programme that's looked at speech and language, and the Education Endowment Foundation offer a load of information and resources as well in those areas if people want those professional development opportunities. But there's a great opportunity for in-setting learning as well, for mentoring, for coaching, for sharing practice and building up that whole team approach. But given if specialisms are developing, then what are the incentives and what's the recognition for people if they develop that level of expertise? How does it shift and affect their role? Is there ways in which they can do that specialism and pivot their role, or change the hours that they work, or their practice time, or do they move around in different ways? So what are the career pathways and career progressions that specialism can open up to staff, which is a great reward in itself? But then, of course, if bonuses and pay rises and other financial incentives are available, then that's going to be attractive to them also, isn't it? And then that might encourage people to go down an additional qualification route. But I suppose that refers to something that I talked about earlier, is that sort of the non-qualified, the qualified, the experienced, and that colleagues who want to career progress. There's also people who are quite happy doing what they're doing and don't want to career progress. So it's giving those sort of qualification routes, but also best practice routes as well. So some people are more concerned about practice, and I think that's protected. And I think that can be one of the reasons why people do leave. They feel a pressure to career progress, or pressure to gain qualifications, and actually when they're quite happy doing what they've always done. So that's important that we identify that.
Thank you, James. That's great. And as we wrap up not only this session, but the whole foundation years recruitment and retention podcast series, I would like to once again extend my thanks to James for taking the time to join us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise and insights. It's been really fantastic to hear from you today. And it's a very important one. It's been an important one for a long time, and it will remain one as we enter a new calendar year as well. So thank you very much. And also thank you for everybody who's been watching the series, and thank you for your continued commitment to making a difference to early years education. Thank you.